tape, they can make me say whatever they want with it.
Right.
They have all of those opportunities. So, good evening, everyone, once again. Our penultimate class, it looks like we will go ahead next week, same time, same place. I will Beli Neder, which means without promise, bring some Hanukkah treats for everybody. Or if, since it's towards the end of Hanukkah and you have Hanukkah treats you want to get rid of, you're welcome to bring them along, and we'll see how that goes. But so tonight's exploration is making a world of difference, the ethics of our social responsibilities. And I sort of recognize that, on the one hand, has sort of nice title, Tikkun Olam. We even encountered this a little bit last week with regards to what are our obligations to shop ethically. And I take a little bit of issue with some of those who put the course together. I feel that they didn't necessarily address that as much as it could have been addressed. And after looking through the sources for this week and doing some independent investigation, I can appreciate why. If all of us were confronted with the responsibility, or even without saying there's a responsibility, the opportunity to do everything in this sort of ethical consumerism, we would probably, as they say in the Talmud, Ein la davar sof. There's no end to the things we need to be concerned of. Are clothes made by people who are being paid livable wages? How far do we need to investigate? What about the food that we eat? Does it come from ecologically friendly, environmentally friendly farms? There are a lot of issues that can be addressed, and maybe some of us, or you, because whatever's cheapest works for me. But some of you may pay attention to these issues, whether it be free range or environmental or organic. But I think that it's very difficult to bring that down into a specific imperative in Jewish law. And I think that Jewish law left it sort of ambiguous, recognizing how complicated it's going to be. Sort of, how come the rabbis didn't address this issue? Because they realized that maybe people wouldn't necessarily listen to them if they came to a final determination. The Talmud has a famous expression when it comes to the mitzvah of providing rebuke. The Torah says in Leviticus, "Hocheach tochiach es anesecha." You should rebuke. You see someone doing something wrong, you should then tell them that they're doing something wrong. While the Talmud comments upon this, that the sages remark, just as it is a mitzvah to say something when it will be heard, it's a mitzvah to keep quiet when no one's going to listen. Now, this does not apply to rabbis giving sermons. There's an exception for that. But I think that these are certain elements of this type of issue in particular, ethical consumerism or social action, that have made it difficult for it to be a clear-cut directive within the Jewish tradition. The Jews must do this. And we see in recent years try an attempt to reverse this. We referred to one of them last week. There's an organization called REW Living. Anyone here heard of REW Living? All right, so then I'll do some promotions for REW Living. It's an Orthodox social justice organization which has attempted to raise the awareness of how companies should be not only certainly should be legal, and if there are industries that are not acting in accordance with the accepted labor laws, they should be held accountable, and also ethical. So I may have mentioned last week the example within restaurants where waiters are not always paid properly, and they have what's called the Tav HaYashar, the ethical seal of approval. Not only is a restaurant kosher, but it's also yasher, kosher, yasher. It rhymes a little bit. The idea that there's a Tav HaYashar, there's the ethical seal of approval there as well. As an example, on the KJ Community Kosher list, there's an asterisk next to the food establishments that have also received the Tav HaYashar. REW Living, for example, has requested that people only list kosher and yosher. It rhymes. It's not by chance. But maybe if maybe the only ones that should be kosher would be yosher. Well, then our double-sided, really small print kosher list would be single-sided with really big print, and it wouldn't fill up. Does this mean the companies that don't subscribe to it are non-ethical and not compliant? Not always. There's some legitimate reasons why people don't feel the need to participate in something like this. They feel that the legal standards are enough. They don't want to submit to something different.
Do they have to pay to get
They don't have to pay to get it. Well, they do because they have to pay legal wages and proper.
No, but not.
But
yeah.
Who's feeding this organization? Who's sponsoring this organization?
No, it runs on donations. It's a nonprofit, like all the other nonprofits. Then there's the, but they feel some of the proprietors I've spoken to feel that they're unfairly picked on. What about clothing companies? What about Judaica shops? Why are you picking on the food all the time? Because it's easy. It's low-hanging fruit. It's an opportunity to do so. But there's been more of an awareness of this ideal, and it will be interesting what happens, 10, 15, 20 years when you compare it to the situation from 20 years ago. And so this exploration will look at some of the contours and what Judaism has to say about being involved, but it isn't necessarily going to provide you which are the causes you should embrace as your own. And there's a good reason why, but you'll have to wait to the end to see it, or to learn it. So we start off with, you see on page 120 in the books, text number 1, the bystander effect. We hear about situations of people standing by doing nothing while terrible things take place. It was one of the news recently that I heard of, and it just shows how bad the situation is because you keep hearing about it. I don't even remember which specific case it was. But you hear that someone was attacked and someone was beaten and people were there and no one did anything. Or something takes place on a subway or something takes place on the street. And a famous case in there, we don't have to go through it in detail, but it was the famous Kitty Genovese case in 1964. Right, where there were 38 respectable, law-abiding citizens in Queens watched a killer stalk and stab a woman, 3 separate attacks in Kew Gardens. You can look through the specifics. The woman screamed, lights went on, windows would open. Miss Genovese was screaming, "Somebody stabbed me! Please help me! Please help me!" A man called down, "Leave the girl alone!" Lights went out, killer returned. Miss Genovese now trying to make her way around the side of the building. Assailant grabbed her again. "I'm dying," she shrieked, "I'm dying." Windows were open, lights went on. Unfortunately, she was stabbed the 3rd time fatally. The police received a call at 3:50 from a neighbor of Miss Genovese. Within 2 minutes, police were there, but it was too late. Now, full disclosure, this is the quote from the New York Times, March 27, 1964. Some of the facts are in dispute. The facts are always in dispute. But in general, this was a situation which typified and became an example of a situation where people stood by and did not respond. And it sort of begs the question, why did people fail to intervene? Yeah?
I think this demonstrates diffusion of responsibility. That
Okay.
if everyone feels like if someone else will take care of it, then it just gets diffused and no one does it.
Okay, someone else's problem. Any other thoughts? I imagine some of you may be thinking, as I thought, that of course if it was me there, of course I would have done the right thing. Right? Which is also something that is very easy to imagine. Because you see something, you're bothered by it, it's terrible. If it was up to me, something would have happened. Any other responses? Yes?
People are afraid of repercussions. Like,
Okay.
what if the murderer knows they said something after that? Or
Okay,
Other
you're afraid of
kinds of-
repercussions. You're
yeah.
afraid that the actions that you undertake may not work and it could actually come out negatively. Anything else? The idea of stepping up and saying something and doing something when you're not sure you're going to be listened to can also lead to people remaining quiet. This is something that sort of stands out, especially today, when you think about the strength of the Jewish community as one example. When Jews have concerns that are specifically related to our community, we're able to stand up. When we have appropriate numbers, we're all New Yorkers here. So when you're in New York, you have a religious issue that's of concern to the Jewish community. Oh, by coincidence, politicians seem to address it. When it comes to the New York Jewish community, politicians line up to meet with the rabbis and the power broker in the Jewish community, all in the hopes of winning over that electorate. Wasn't always the case. Or you talk about the role of the pro-Israel community, the strength of organizations like AIPAC. that can set up appointments with all 535 members of Congress. That's a recent phenomenon. Something that has been addressed by historians when looking at the response of American Jewry during the Holocaust, during World War II. Rabbi Luxing famously wrote a book, Were We Our Brothers' Keepers, which studied the silence of the American Jewish community, the relative silence, and with few exceptions, during World War II, and what were some of the reasons, and how life seemed to go on as usual. And generally, the upshot in a lot of these explorations is that people didn't think that there was anything that they could do. They didn't want to draw attention to themselves. The American Jewish community was too weak. So whether it be a community's response to issues or whether it be an individual, sometimes a sense of powerlessness is what rules the day. What factors would have made it more likely for people to have intervened? Yeah.
I guess in this kind of situation, I guess what I've learned is that if you're in sort of an emergency situation, the important thing is to really shout and point at someone, and actually, if you identify someone, you help me, I need help, and identify that you need help, people are much more likely to, in that situation, to need help.
Okay, so they make a certain personalization of the incident. If you recognize a person screaming, the likelihood is you also be more, you respond with more alacrity. There are plenty of low-key examples also. What happens if you pass somebody with a flat tire, where the hood is up, or you encounter, you see a kid who looks lost in the hallway.
I mean, my mom fainted in the street once in 34th Street in Herald Square. I mean,
Right.
a million people came and picked her up and helped her and helped the ambulance.
That's great.
And
It's sort of, but it's not always that natural. It's something what you hope would become natural, but there are plenty of people who don't do that. And so I guess if you're going to faint, be in Times Square.
Yeah.
It's also the difference.
Herald Square.
Yeah.
It's also the difference between the city in 1968 or whatever it was, and the city today.
Right. Okay. So I think that sometimes we also draw a smaller circle of responsibility. If I recognize it, if it impacts me directly or someone I know or a relative, then we respond. If not, it's easier to ignore. Think about the example. Think about panhandlers on the street. We start thinking, and there on the one hand, it could be a nice idea to drop some change in the plate, or more often than not, they'll throw the change back at you because it's not enough. But that certainly impacts our response. But we think, someone else will do it, or if enough people do it, if 100 people pass by and 25 help out, then I'll help out every fourth day or something like that. If we don't feel it as directly, we don't necessarily feel the need to respond. But when should our circle of responsibility expand? And what are some of the variables? So, as we have been doing, let's look back at some of the paradigms within the Jewish tradition that can inform our thinking on this subject. And one of the first is Noah. Right, Noah built an ark. Noah was clearly someone who God chose for something, because he did not drown in the flood. But at the same time, Noah is sometimes get sort of the short end of the stick. What do I mean by that?
He said he was a Sonic and furs.
Okay, so Noah is not viewed as being completely righteous. Right? Often he is held out as someone who did as God requested, but he was a little bit too timid. Noah, according to the Midrash though, actually, Noah spent 120 years building the ark. Remember, we're not talking about today's lifespan. Noah lived for 900 and some odd years. But Noah built an ark, and according to the Midrash, he spent 120 years doing it, so that people would say, "Hey Noah, what are you doing?" Day in, day out. "Hey Noah, what are you doing?" He'd be like, "I'm building an ark." Why are you building an ark? Because God's going to destroy the world. Why is God going to destroy the world? Because you're wicked. And he did this for 120 years, day in, day out. In the end, people did not do anything. And the world gets destroyed, and Noah and his family are those who ultimately repopulate the earth. But he's generally viewed unfavorably, especially in comparison to Abraham. And this emerges in text number 2, where God recognizes the wickedness of Sodom and Amorah, and he feels the need to inform Abraham of what is happening, and Abraham engages in his famous protest. And he says, how can you do this, God? And he starts off with maybe they're 50, 45, 40, 30, 20, 10, and he gives up a 10, recognizing that it's not, if there aren't 10 people there, then this place really is, stuck. And Judaism picks up in the different responses of Noah and Avraham. Look at text number 3. This is a mystical text, the Zohar. When God informed Noah that only he and his sons would be saved, Noah did not pray on behalf of the people of the world, and they were destroyed. Therefore, the flood is eponymously associated with Noah. They call it, Isaiah calls it the Me Noach Zot Li. These are the waters of Noah. The flood is named after Noah. It's like, hurricane, whatever, Sandy. It was flood Noah. He's connected to it because he didn't do enough. It makes sense that this be a mystical text, because did Noah have to do more? He didn't have to do more. He was doing exactly as God commanded. But he could have done more on his own. He did not have any sort of initiative. Abraham, though, was distraught, and he protested the injustice. Abraham is an example of seeing what's wrong and at least saying something about it, right? See something, say something. Reactive versus proactive. And we see this in how they are described in the relationship with God. Look at text 4a and 4b on page 126. Noah was a perfectly righteous man in his generations. Noah walked with God. What about Abraham? God, before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked. Noah walked with God. Abraham walked in front of God. He was more proactive. He was leading the way. Walking with versus walking before. And this is the difference between keeping focus on the specific responsibility in front of you, in the case of Noah, listening to what God had commanded him, and Abraham, who heard what God said and said, no, that's not right. I think it's interesting to note that Abraham probably could have done more. Abraham was upset that Sodom and Amorah were going to be destroyed. He complained about them. He negotiated with God. But can anyone think of something Abraham could have done that may have that he could have done more in his attempts to save Sodom and Amorah?
Could have said 5.
Okay, he could have gone even lower. He could have warned them. He could have proactively engaged them. Anything else? I don't remember where I read this, but this always sticks in my mind.
Moses said, blot me out of the book.
Okay. Moses put himself at risk. We're going to look about Moses in a minute, because it's sort of the next stage in the development of this activism. He could have chained himself to the bulldozer. And he could have gone to Sodom and said, okay, I'm moving to Sodom. And then, let's see what God does. So I think that there's a recognition of the fact that you should do something, but you can't always change everything. And even in Abraham wasn't necessarily expected to go and stand in the way of the destruction. Which I think also speaks to how we began this idea, that there's a need to be aware, there's a need to take action, but sometimes those actions, how drastic do those actions get? Do you lie in front of the bulldozer? Do you go live in Sodom? And we'll see how that develops as we look towards the next personality who engaged in activist behavior, and that's Moses. Moses' development is actually mentioned in the text. Abraham, we don't know anything about him. We know who he was, we know God spoke to him, God said go. But Moses, we know a little bit about it. Look at page 127, text 5a. Moses grew up, and he goes out to his brothers, and he observed their burdens, and he saw an Egyptian man striking a Hebrew man of his brothers. Moses turned this way and that. Upon seeing no man, he slew the Egyptian, hid the body in the sand. Moses, we see what it was that prompted Moses to take action. It was this sense of defending his people. Someone is in danger, he took action, he killed the Egyptian. So what happens next? What happens next in this story? Yeah?
Well, is it the lack of witnesses, or is it the lack of other people to do it?
What, in terms of
That is true.
the fact that he,
He's checking to see if there are any witnesses.
okay,
I'm-
all right, well, okay, so even Moses is willing to take a stand, but he's worried about what may happen.
Well,
He
it's a
seems worried
question,
about the
it's
consequences.
either a question of responsibility, if there's anyone else there to also share the responsibility, or it's a question.
Okay, you know, I think you can look at it both ways. Moses is thinking, well, maybe someone else will do it. No one else is there to do it, so he did it. And we'll see a source that relates to this concept in a little bit. Or maybe he wants to take action, but he wants to make sure he won't get in trouble for it. If someone was there, maybe he wouldn't have had. Maybe if someone was there who could have stopped him. Turns out that someone was there watching him. Right, because the next day he sees two Jews fighting, and he says, "Why are you fighting?" And the guy says, "Who are you? What are you going to kill us like the way you killed the other guy?" And Moses gets into trouble, and he has to flee. That's text 5b. He flees, goes to Midian, sits on the well. Right, the well is a great place for Jews to meet. That's why we need more wells these days. That's why we have a singles problem, because there are no wells. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters. They came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flocks. But the shepherds came and drove them away. Moses arose and came to their rescue, provided water for their flocks. So Moses continues this commitment to justice. The women are being attacked, so Moses stands up for them. The legacy of Abraham has found a true heir in Moses. And this is part of his election and selection to be the leader of the Jewish people moving forward. And I think we can appreciate this activist tradition. And yet we encounter plenty of situations where people don't act. And other examples of morally ambiguous inaction. When it comes to, we talked before about the interplay between the legal obligations and values. Look at text number 6. So a drowning man can scream for hours in front of a crowd of Olympic swimmers, and no one would have a legal obligation to dive in and attempt to save his life. You don't have to take any action at all. Even actions that are benign require little effort. There's no requirement to make a cell phone call to an experienced lifeguard to the Coast Guard. Standing by and watching the victim die is completely legal. Any reactions or what Judaism says about this subject? There's a famous text which comes to mind. Here it says you can stand by, and it's absolutely legal. Judaism says lo ta'amod, don't stand by. Lo ta'amod al dam re'ach, don't stand by idly as your brother's blood is spilled. So here you can stand, and Judaism says no, you're not allowed to stand. Text number 7, Maimonides describes the legal obligation. A person who can save a fellow who is being threatened with murder but fails to do so is in violation of the injunction, do not stand idly by the shedding of your fellow's blood. Similar one is in violation, do not stand idly by your fellow's blood. If someone sees someone drowning at sea, or being attacked by robbers or wild animal, and is in a position to save him or hire others to do so but refrains from assisting, or if one hears Gentiles or informers conspiring to harm another, plotting his downfall, and is not informed the potential victim of the looming threat. Right? We have a responsibility of ta'amod, lo ta'amod al dam re'ach. Secular law, standing by and watching the victim die, is legal. When it comes to Jewish law, do not stand idly by your fellow's blood. It's absolutely forbidden. There's an activist requirement, even in non-life-threatening scenarios. Look at text number 8. Here's the idea of you see your fellow's ox or sheep straying, you may not ignore your responsibility, rather you shall return it to your fellow. Do the same with his lost donkey, your garment, or any of your fellow's lost articles which you have found, you cannot ignore it. There is a need, it's not just about you should, but there's the responsibility of you cannot. You can't. Something within your capability, you cannot ignore it. Now, of course, we'll then have to figure out what is within your capability. And sometimes the calculations that are made can impact how we would respond to these types of situations. So we have seen there's an activist tradition within Judaism. From Noah, contrasting to Abraham, to Moses, to Jewish laws, emphasis and absolute obligation, even in situations where secular law does not require or mandate. Look, I imagine in a situation if we were sitting at somewhere, or we heard of a person who watched another person drown in a swimming pool and didn't even do anything like calling a lifeguard, we'd probably think the guy's a real, no good there, to be kind. But the difference is secular law doesn't obligate it, Jewish law does. It's not surprising that Jewish law has a different take, as we have seen. Jewish law is not about yes and no, and right and wrong. Jewish law is to create a halakha, a path towards proper living.
But aren't there like Good Samaritan laws where you can't, I believe?
Well, that's the season, the series
Season finale.
That was so much a disappointment. Yeah, they pumped, they really pumped it up in this.
The Seinfeld.
We will discuss Seinfeld off camera.
The show's finale.
Yeah, but
Series finale.
I love how they brought the character back.
yes, that was the highlight. But
But seriously,
Yeah.
aren't there, I mean,
Amanda, I don't think there are
I think there are
laws.
certain.
Good Samaritan law generally protects someone who does get involved, who does something wrong. If you do CPR to someone and crush their rib, he can't sue you.
got it, but there's no real obligation.
Correct. There are certain obligations for
Minors.
professionals, healthcare professionals. I believe that if you have the ability, if you're certified to do something and you walk on by, I think that there may be something. But the
Right, I mean,
average
like you
Joe
said,
doesn't have
The
that.
motorcycle-
motorcycle
the
that
stupid
cops on the
bell.
Upper West Side with a motorcycle.
All right, and well, we'll have to see how that plays out in court. So there's an idea, when trying to understand where this responsibility comes from. Something that we saw last week. Something we saw last week with regards to Bishvili Nivra Ha'olam. The world was created just for me. The idea that it was to instill the concept that Adam was created completely unique, also completely alone. There's no one else to do it but Adam. He's the one who has to get things done. Everyone needs to have a similar attitude. We talk about it being the idea that every person has opportunities, and every person is unique, and every person has their own special mission, which is true. But the idea is also to instill that you have to look at the world that it's just you. It's me versus the world to some extent, because I can't think of that you're going to get things done. The world was created for me to take on the responsibility. If Adam HaRishon did nothing, then the world would cease to exist. Right? If that first command to be fruitful and multiply yielded no children, there would be no world. And so when we encounter situations, the same mandate, Bishvili Nivra Olam, is meant to guide our sense of responsibility. What happens without such an attitude? We'll look at text. Without such an attitude, then people don't act. And sometimes it's the idea, the sort of diffusement of responsibility that leads people to think they can get away with it. Look at text number 10 from Malcolm Gladwell. The truth about Genovese, however, turns out to be a little more complicated and more interesting. Two New York City psychologists, Bibb Latane of Columbia University and John Darley of NYU, subsequently conducted a series of studies to try to understand what they dubbed the bystander problem. They staged emergency of one kind or another in different situations in order to see who would come and help. What they found surprising was that the one factor above all else that predicted helping behavior was how many witnesses there were to the event. In one experiment, for example, Latane and Darley had a student alone in the room stage an epileptic fit. When there's just one person next door listening, that person rushed to the student stage 85% of the time. When subjects thought there were 4 others also overhearing the seizure, they came to the student state only 31% of the time. In another experiment, people who saw smoke seeping out from under a doorway would report it 75% of the time when they were on their own. The incident would be reported only 38% of the time when they were in a group. When people are in a group, in other words, responsibility for acting is diffused. They assume someone else will make the call. In the case of Kitty Genovese, then, social psychologists like Latane and Darley argue the lesson is not that no one called despite the fact that 38 people heard her scream. It's that no one called because 38 people heard her scream. Ironically, had she been attacked in a lonely street with just one witness, she might have lived. So that is the research. Could be that, we said earlier on, someone else will do it. Unless you know that no one else will do it. Responsibility and the power of the individual to act by recognizing that yes, you need to realize that if there are other people if there are other people around who might act, well, the experiment showed they won't. So the idea of going back to Bishvili Nivra Ha'olam, the power of the one, of the individual, we're not talking matrix of the one here, but the idea, the responsibility of the one to take action. And the difficulty is, with this activist tradition, with this idea emerging from Noah to Abraham, through Moses, through the absolute obligation to help, whether it be life-saving situations or non-life-saving situations, and recognizing that recognizing the power of the individual, especially because you can't rely on the collective. The question is, so where do we focus? What in a situation where we're not confronting the drowning individual, or the overburdened donkey or camel, or the lost object? Where do we draw the line? How do we extend? How do we extend the circle? And so it's in developing the attitude towards the other, which may spur to proper activism. It's important to have a sense of what Judaism sees as the ideal on various components. The first is with regards to human dignity. When helping another person, you have to not allow the person being helped to be made to feel inferior. The expression in the Talmud is don't act like a lender. What does it mean, don't act like a lender? Look at page 132, text number 11. It's forbidden for a lender to appear before a borrower or even to pass before him if the lender is aware that the borrower does not have the means to repay the debt, because the borrower will be mortified when he sees the lender, but cannot afford to repay the debt. The verse alludes to such behavior when saying, "You shall not behave toward him like a lender." Even to be like a lender is forbidden. So you lend somebody money, you see them on the street, you have the obligation to cross the street. Because when they see you, they may feel bad. The idea of that, Judaism extends this need to validate the dignity of the other, even when we're talking about criminals. A lot of the laws involving execution of criminals is often to maintain their dignity. Because in those situations where you think the person is entitled to no consideration, Jewish tradition wants to ensure that you provide that consideration. And ensuring proper dignity is one of the elements, or one of the guides in terms of when and how we respond to the needs of others. Let's go beyond the human kingdom into the animal kingdom. What are our responsibilities towards animals? Any card-carrying PETA members? It's okay. PETA? PETA? Anyone not, Society for the Protection? Oh, she's not here. So there's an interesting biblical precedent which should inform our thinking towards this. My goal is not to have a membership drive for them, but look at text number 12. You're probably familiar with the situation. When Eliezer goes to seek a wife for Isaac, he has this idea of how he will determine who's the proper woman. I will say to the maiden, "Please lower your pitcher and I will drink." And she will respond, "Drink and I'll give water to your camels." She's the one whom you have designated for your servant Isaac, and through her I will know that you perform loving kindness with my master. And ultimately, Rebecca is chosen as the one because she in fact does say, "Oh, let me take care of you, and at the same time, I will take care of your animals." And Jewish tradition has a concept, a famous concept called Tsar Balei Chaim. Tsar Balei Chaim means pain towards an animal. So Tsar Balei Chaim is a term when you utilize it that you're not allowed to cause pain to an animal. And there are certain rules with regards to animals that may seem to give precedence to the animal over the person. Text number 13. Asur la'adam sheyochal kodem she'yitei machal lebehemoto. You're not allowed to eat before you feed your animals. Because it says, "I will give grass in your fields for your cattle," and only thereafter does it say, "You shall eat and be satisfied." This was a rule written by an animal lover, clearly. So for me, since I'm very wary of being able to follow this properly, I will never own a pet. I tell my kids very much want a dog, and I always tell them that my favorite dog is someone else's dog. And there's a Talmudic anecdote which brings this point home. The need to be sensitive towards animals, and it is clearly a strand of rabbinic thinking. A calf was being taken to slaughter when it broke away and hid its head under Rabbi Yehuda the prince's robe and lowered in terror. Go, said Rabbi Yehuda, this is your destiny. Right? Animals are there for us to eat. Thereupon they said in heaven, because he is not compassionate, we'll bring suffering upon him. For the following 13 years, Rabbi Yehuda suffered a series of painful illnesses until the following episode. One day, Rabbi Yehuda's maidservant was sweeping the house. Seeing some young weasels, she started to sweep them away. Let them be, Rabbi Yehuda told her. It is written, his compassion extends upon all of his works. Right? The God is compassion. This is part of the Ashrei prayer that we say every day. Rachamav al kol ma'asav. His mercy extends to all of God's creations. In heaven, they then declared, because he is compassionate, we will be compassionate to him. And Rabbi Yehuda's suffering ceased. So, leaving aside this sort of idea, this direct causation between action and punishment, we don't always fully understand that. There's got to be a reason why this statement makes its way onto the books. And if we really hated animals, we would not record this. It wouldn't be part of the Talmudic canon. We see text number 15. This is this is a response from dealing with hunting. Consider for a moment, if a person shoots his fellow with an arrow simply for the purpose of entertainment and fun, would he not be punished? Certainly he would, right? I can't shoot you just because I want to. I would never want to, but you get the idea. Why should animals and beasts be any different? God's compassion extends upon all his works, the verse says. So we are permitted to slaughter them for food. It is not permitted to kill them for sport. Right, so this doesn't mean that it doesn't mean to go vegetarian. But we can appreciate where this idea comes from of being very sensitive to how we treat animals. And there are some who feel that vegetarianism is a spiritual ideal, and it would make sense if we have to have this care and concern for animals. By looking at animals and thinking, get in my belly, that's what Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi was doing. He was punished for that, right, as it is expressed in the Talmud. So there is the recognition that when we want to identify places where we need to stand up for the rights of animals. Balancing this with the fact that we're allowed to use animal products as part of the very fact that Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi said it shows that was also a way of thinking within the Jewish tradition. That yes, this is your destiny, to be eaten. But maybe articulating it only that way was not the appropriate approach, and hence Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi was punished.
Can you shoot, let's say, animals we're not for sport? Can you shoot more than you can eat? If you give away what you can't eat to.
So remember, you're not allowed to shoot animals to eat them because you have to slaughter them properly.
Oh, well, whatever.
So
yeah.
But you certainly
right, of course.
But you have to remember, this is not there is an other hand. There are those who don't take the same concern, the same sensitivity. They follow Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. Who cares what you do to the animal? For example, you're allowed to wear leather shoes. So could you go hunting if you want to turn that animal into shoes?
Right.
Yes. Can you do it just for sport? According to the opinion presented in text number 15.
You can't go kill a deer or keep the antlers and give the meat to somebody else?
It would seem to be, you sort of said a lot in one sentence. If the meat's going to be consumed by someone, then that's for food. And the fact that you get to keep the antlers, that would seem to be an indirect benefit. I think this probably says something with how what is the Jewish response to wildlife preservation. Right, the World Wildlife Federation, and you could buy, for a donation of $18, you get a set of cards of the endangered. That would be viewed as a nice idea to support those types of initiatives. Now, does the World Wildlife Foundation or Federation use its resources wisely? You can go to Charity Navigator and figure it out. There's a lot of other side. Do not construe this to mean that it's a mitzvah to give to the WWF. But there's certainly sensitivity towards being careful about protecting the animal kingdom. Yeah, I hear you, World Wrestling Federation. Not anymore. That's why they had to change the name, WWE.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, they have to change it. And that's all very different now.
The animal people won.
That's right. The rights of animals trumped Hulk Hogan. What about environmental consciousness? So there is a very fundamental rule when it comes to the environment, something called Bal Tashtit, or Ashkenazic way of pronouncing it is Bal Tashtis. You have to be careful with needlessly destroying things. And this emerges from when you go out to war, the Torah says in the book of Devarim, that you can't needlessly or for no reason destroy trees. You have to be careful about the trees. The idea that destroying trees for no reason is a sin, basically. Right? That's Lord of the Rings when the trees go to war. Right? That image came to mind for me. And we see the need to respect the environment in text number 16. From the Sefer HaChinuch, which is a book of religious instruction. This is the way of the pious and people of good deeds. They love peace, take joy in others' fortune, and strive to bring their fellows to the ways of the Torah. They do not destroy even a single mustard seed. They are distressed by any wastefulness or destruction that they observe, and they do all in their power to prevent any sort of destruction. Right? The respect for things of value. The idea being this is the imperative for used clothing drives, or donating uneaten food to those in need. Sometimes more complicated. Even if you try to do that, City Harvest is not going to come and empty your refrigerator and find use for it. It's a little bit more complicated than that. In Israel, they're a little bit more liberal in terms of their concern for some of these types of things, and they will come around and take uneaten food from a wedding and give that away and utilize it for those in need, and to help prepare lunches in schools where children don't bring their own lunches. It's a little bit more complicated here, but there's an organization in Israel, Leket Yisrael, you may have heard of. It used to be called Table to Table, because the idea was whatever food is left on my table, we'll give to someone who needs it. But then now it's called Leket Yisrael. They do what they can to avoid food going to waste. So, for example, they have volunteers who try and harvest the remains of a particular vegetable harvest. Because at some point, for the farmer, it's just not worth it, because the food's been out there a little bit too long, so by the time it gets picked and gets to the market, it will be bordering on being rotten. They won't be able to sell. So it doesn't pay to employ workers to harvest this crop. So Leket Yisrael, it comes from the mitzvah of leket, which is have a corner of your field left for the poor, will bring in volunteers. They use birthright groups or trips, or families can do it, to pick the food and get it to someone else so that it can be utilized. And this is that idea. Not even a mustard seed. I think about that when I see the almost empty thing of mustard in my refrigerator. But anything of value that is destroyed would fall under the prohibition of Bal Tashtit. Do we have the ability to get rid of that last squirt of mustard and donate to someone who's more in need than me? Probably not, but we should at least develop the sensitivity. Yes?
How come being kosher is, I guess, a cornerstone of being pious or from, and yet taking care of the environment is not? How did that become?
I think it makes a lot of sense, because one involves us, and one we're not confronted with the same way. Right? Our kitchen, and our ability to share our food with others is easily judged. Whether or not, look at the next text, whether or not we crumple up a piece of garbage and don't give a hoot but we pollute, that doesn't really make a difference. You talk about sensitivity towards the environment. Look at text number 17. This story's been told. I've heard this story about different rabbis, but here the rabbi is walking with his father, another rabbi, and they're looking at how beautiful nature is. Every sway, every movement of the grass and stalks was included in the vast primordial divine plan. And God's providence orchestrates it all, every detail acting upon a divine ordained purpose. We say, Ma gadlu ma'asecha Hashem. How wondrous are your works, O Lord. As we walked and we entered a wooded area, I was lost in thought, my mind trying to digest what I just heard about divine providence. Deeply moved by its subtlety and significance, walking past the tree without deliberation, I tore off a leaf and held it in my hand. As I continued to walk, I tore the leaf to pieces and threw the shreds to the ground. The holy Arizal, Rabbi Isaac Luria, my father started saying to me, says that every tree leaf is a creation that contains a godly life force created by God to fulfill a particular function. We just spoke about divine providence, and here without thought you tore off a leaf, played with it, bent and crumpled it, ripped it to pieces and threw it hither and thither. I like that word, thither. How can one be so callous to one of God's creations? How is the eye of the leaf less than your eye? So, this is pretty environmentally, this is pretty tree hugging, if you ask me. Yes, there is a big difference. The leaf belongs to the vegetable kingdom, and you are human, a big difference indeed. But we must always be cognizant of the purpose and divine destiny of every object. So, so talk about environmental consciousness. This is introducing it as being of religious value. So when they, do we have an obligation to bring our cloth bags to Food Emporium or Seatown or wherever? It would seem to be yes, but again, how do we draw the line? How do we extend? We talk about our kosher is right there for us to control, and it's not always that easy when it comes to kosher. So when do you begin to take steps beyond the circle? So lots of things to worry about. Limited capabilities. How do we prioritize? Oh, you have an answer. Good.
No.
I don't.
Well, aren't the laws of kosher also partly intended to be humane? I mean, it's all part and parcel.
Oh, for sure. Oh, no. So you definitely get to this sensitivity within the laws of kosher. I don't know if the cow would agree, but there is this attempt. It raises a number of issues. There's a whole back and forth with regard to should animals be stunned before they're slaughtered. This was an issue that was raised back in the 1930s when they were initially trying to prohibit kosher slaughter in some of the countries, and there was a dispute within Jewish law whether this was permissible. Some said yes because stunning is not harming the animal. Some felt that stunning would harm the animal too much and would impact its kosher status. Because remember, kosher is not just about slaughtering it properly. The animal has to have a certain health. It can't be torn up, it can't be wounded, it can't be damaged. This was a back and forth. Most opinions felt that you couldn't stun the animal, but then you start getting into question, well, why can't you stun the animal? If you really care about humane conditions, then shouldn't you do this? So there is a concern, but I'm not so sure. I'm not sure how far it goes.
Well, I mean, presumably it goes as far as it was intended to go.
Correct. Kosher slaughter, yes. Stunning beforehand, not clear. And the thinking is, the argument has been made that kosher slaughter is humane. If you specifically focus on that, you will find some sort of veterinarian who will prove to you that there are more humane ways to get kosher food. I think it's helpful,
I would say that, but by definition, it's humane to a Jewish
Correct. So when we talk about activism and taking activism, what does it mean to be Jewishly active versus how others would view it? So I think we can apply that. Jessica, back into your case in terms of environmentalism. How far do you need to go? You may be a Jewish environmentalist even if you shop with plastic bags. My apologies to the real eco-friendly people in the audience.
And wearing fur coats, I don't know what's on.
Fur coats. Where's my can of paint? Look, I think that if we do have the authority, we do have the permission to use animals for our purposes. Once upon a time that was the only way to stay warm. So does that mean now that we have other alternatives we can't? I don't think Jewish law would give a direct mandate, but there's clearly the need to ask the question. And I think that we're talking about where to draw the circle. We know that we draw our circle around being active among things that we can control. We know we have an obligation to keep God's commandments the best that we possibly can. So will we extend our circle of activism towards better treatment of animals? And I don't want the poor minks or whatever, rabbits or killed for their skins. I may take that on as my activist cause. I have no problems being an absolute activist, and I will never wear fur. I'll wear nutrient. And we'll get that. Thank you very much. It's the Seinfeld with the hat that George brought. Stanza. All right, enough of that. If I only knew all of my Jewish laws, as well as I knew some. But what about finding how to extend that circle? So text 19, and it's not really that satisfying because really it's going to be up to each person. It's stated in Proverbs, honor God with your possessions. This means with whatever He has graced you. For example, if you have a beautiful voice, lead the communal prayers. So, Chia, the nephew of Rabbi Elazar HaKapar, had a beautiful voice. Rabbi Elazar used to tell him, Chia, my son, rise and honor God with what He has graced you. Right? Every person has a contribution. to make. How? Well, you have to think about what is the ability that you have. You have a nice voice, make that your contribution. And you see this is the learning exercise. Write down 1 to 3 areas you're particularly talented and you're passionate about. So I am very passionately opposed to ever wearing fur. So I have one of mine. I don't know what if maybe you have some of yours. But there's the idea of starting somewhere, starting local. You know, within the laws of charity, there is a hierarchy that Maimonides talks about in terms of helping local charities first. And this is something that is sometimes discussed with regards to trying to help community institutions like day schools. If people would stick to this particular formula as advocated by Maimonides in Jewish law with regards to helping local charities, well, maybe we would do better, because people would have to direct their funding this way. Or getting Jews to give to Jewish causes. Right? We talked before about how many rich Jews there are in the top 50 and how many of them give to Jewish causes. The number is not as high. So there is a recognition that there are priorities and people have to identify their own priorities. But start with, Rabbi Chia, start with the skill set. What are you good at? Start with what you're passionate about. I think that the circle, we care about what we are most tied to, our family, our own personal needs, but what are you good at? Maybe that's something to be passionate about. What appeals to you? And I think each of us has certain things, certain causes that would appeal to us. Some it's the environment, some it's animals, some it's charitable organizations that help poor children with have enough to eat, or help give them a better education, or special needs causes. I think that there's no Jewish directive that this cause is for you and that cause is for you. But there is the responsibility to be aware of the need to be socially conscious and active in a variety of spheres, and then to try and prioritize and identify the places to be active based upon these directives. And recognizing that to start small, right? Text number 22 on page 141 has sort of like the nice story about the young girl walking along the beach,